I've always been on the road for work, driving long distances between small towns, hopping from one motel to another. I've become numb to the discomfort and eerie vibes they often give off. But this time, it was different. This time, I'm not sure if I'll ever forget what happened at the Willow Pines Motel. It was a late October evening when I pulled off the highway. Rain hammered against my windshield, and the fog blurred the road signs. My GPS had stopped working miles back, and I was exhausted. The bright neon sign for Willow Pines flickered in the distance, its light barely cutting through the thick mist. I didn't have many options, so I turned into the lot. The motel was exactly what you'd expect. Peeling paint, a dimly lit office, and a vending machine that looked older than me. The manager, an older man with sunken eyes and a voice that felt like gravel, handed me a key with the number 17 engraved on it. "Rooms down the far end," he said without looking up. "Don't mind the noise." That should have been my first red flag, but I was too tired to care. The room was as unremarkable as I'd imagined. Thin carpeting, an old TV, and a faint smell of mildew. I dropped my bag, locked the door, and collapsed onto the bed. The rain outside didn't let up, and the faint hum of the TV was the only thing keeping the silence at bay. Around midnight, I woke up to a strange noise. At first, I thought it was the rain, but then I realized it was coming from inside the room. It sounded like whispering, soft, unintelligible murmurs, almost like someone was standing at the foot of my bed. My heart raced as I sat up and scanned the room. "Hello," I called out, my voice shaky. Silence. I turned on the bedside lamp, but nothing seemed out of place. The door was still locked, and the windows were shut tight. I told myself it was just my imagination and laid back down. But the moment I turned off the light, the whispering started again. This time it was louder. I froze, gripping the blanket tightly, my eyes darting toward the darkness at the corner of the room. Slowly, I reached for my phone to turn on the flashlight. When I illuminated the corner, my stomach dropped. The wallpaper was peeling back, and behind it, there was something moving. Shadows shifted unnaturally, like they were crawling against the wall. And then I saw it. A hand, pale, gaunt, and clawed, sliding out from the gap in the wallpaper. I bolted upright and flicked on every light in the room. The whispering stopped instantly. The corner looked normal again, as if nothing had happened. My breathing was erratic, and I decided I wasn't staying in that room another second. I grabbed my bag and rushed to the door, but when I turned the knob, it wouldn't budge. The lock clicked and clanked as I tried to force it open, but it was as if the door had fused to the frame. Panic set in, and I pounded on the door, screaming for help. That's when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of someone breathing behind me. Slowly, I turned around. The corner of the room was no longer empty. A figure stood there, half shrouded in shadow. Its eyes were hollow pits, and its mouth stretched unnaturally wide, whispering something I couldn't understand. I stumbled backward, my legs giving out as I pressed myself against the door. The figure began to crawl toward me, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a marionette controlled by an unskilled puppeteer. In a moment of sheer desperation, I slammed my fist against the light switch, plunging the room into darkness. For a second, everything went silent. Then, the door flew open behind me, and I tumbled into the hallway. I didn't stop running until I was in my car. I didn't even bother going back to the office. I just sped off into the night, rain pounding against the windshield. When I finally dared to look in the rearview mirror, I swear I saw the figure standing in the motel parking lot, watching me leave. The next morning, I called the motel, intending to demand answers. But when the line connected, a confused voice answered. "Willow Pines? That place burned down years ago." I was on my way back home from a long business trip. The highway stretched endlessly, and the monotony of the road was taking its toll. It was late, my eyes felt heavy, and the occasional flash of headlights from passing cars wasn't enough to keep me alert. I needed a place to sleep before I ended up wrapped around a tree. That's when I saw the flickering neon sign. "Vacancy, Hilltop Motel," It looked old and a little run down, perched on a small hill just off the highway. Desperate for rest, I pulled in, gravel crunching beneath my tires. The office was dimly lit, and the man behind the counter looked like he hadn't had company in weeks. His eyes were sunken, and his voice carried a slow drawl. "One night?" he asked, barely looking at me. "Yeah," I replied, fishing out some cash. He slid a key across the counter. "Room 13, upstairs at the far end." I hesitated. Room 13? Seemed cliché, but I wasn't superstitious and I was too tired to care. I grabbed the key and headed up the creaking wooden stairs to the second floor. The hallway was eerily silent, except for the faint hum of a vending machine near the stairwell. The fluorescent lights above flickered slightly as I walked down the corridor, the old carpet muffling my footsteps. Room 13 was at the very end, just as the clerk said. The door was slightly scuffed, the brass numbers dull with age. I slid the key into the lock, turned it, and pushed the door open. The room smelled faintly of mildew and cleaning chemicals. It was sparsely furnished. A bed with a sagging mattress, a small table, a chair, and a TV that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. A single window faced the highway, its curtains heavy and yellowed with time. I shut the door behind me and dropped my bag on the floor. The first thing I noticed was the strange chill in the room, despite the warm night outside. I chalked it up to the old building and turned on the heater. It whirred to life but didn't seem to do much. Too tired to fuss, I stripped down to my t-shirt and boxers and slid under the covers. The bed was uncomfortable, the springs creaking with every shift of my weight. I closed my eyes, hoping sleep would come quickly, but an odd feeling settled over me. It was as though the room wasn't quite right. The silence wasn't peaceful. It felt oppressive, almost watchful. I turned on the TV for some background noise, but all it produced was static. Frustrated, I shut it off and lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling. That's when I heard it. A faint, rhythmic tapping sound coming from the wall behind the bed. Tap, tap, tap. I froze, straining to listen. The tapping continued, steady and deliberate, like someone was on the other side, trying to get my attention. I tried to tell myself it was just the pipes or the wind, but the sound was too deliberate, too human. "Hello," I called out, my voice cracking slightly. The tapping stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. The room felt colder now, and the shadows seemed deeper, darker. I tried to shake off the unease and lay back down, pulling the blanket up to my chin. Just as I started to drift off, I heard it again, this time from the window. A soft, insistent knock. Knock, knock, knock. My eyes flew open, and my breath caught in my throat. The curtains were drawn, but I could see the faint outline of a figure standing just outside the glass. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice trembling. No answer. The knocking stopped. I wanted to get up and look, but fear rooted me to the bed. I reached for my phone, but it was dead. I hadn't bothered to charge it. I cursed under my breath and sat there, paralyzed, staring at the window. Then, the knocking resumed, louder this time, more urgent. Knock, knock, knock. Summoning all my courage, I threw off the blanket, grabbed the lamp from the bedside table, and approached the window. My hands shook as I reached for the curtain and yanked it open. There was no one there, just the empty parking lot, bathed in pale moonlight. My reflection stared back at me from the glass, wide-eyed and pale. I let out a shaky laugh, trying to convince myself I was imagining things, and turned back toward the bed. That's when I saw it, the chair in the corner of the room. It had been empty when I arrived, but now someone was sitting in it, or something. The figure was shadowy, its features indistinct, but I could feel its eyes on me. My throat went dry, and I stumbled back, dropping the lamp. It shattered on the floor, plunging the room into darkness. I scrambled for the door, fumbling with the lock in my panic. When I finally wrenched it open and bolted into the hallway, the cold air hit me like a slap. I turned back once, just long enough to see the door to room 13 swing shut on its own. I didn't stop running until I reached the office. The clerk looked up from his newspaper, his expression as lifeless as before. "Problem?" he asked, his voice devoid of concern. "There's someone in my room," I gasped, pointing back toward the stairs. He tilted his head slightly. "Room 13? Yes." His eyes narrowed, and for the first time, I saw something flicker across his face. Pity? Fear? He sighed and leaned back in his chair. "Son, no one stayed in room 13 for years. What are you talking about? You gave me the key." He shook his head slowly. "I didn't give you a key to that room. I don't even have one. It's been locked up ever since." He trailed off, his gaze drifting toward the ceiling. "Ever since what?" I demanded, my voice rising. He didn't answer, just stared at me with those hollow eyes. I didn't wait to find out. I grabbed my bag from the floor of the office and bolted for my car. The engine roared to life, and I sped out of the parking lot without looking back. I drove through the night, the adrenaline keeping me awake. When I finally reached home, I collapsed onto my bed, exhausted but unable to sleep. The image of that shadowy figure in the chair haunted me every time I closed my eyes. A week later, I passed the Hilltop Motel again while driving down the highway. Only this time, there was no neon sign, no gravel driveway, no building at all. Just an overgrown lot with a rusted, broken-down signpost. "Room 13. Do not disturb," I whispered to myself and pressed harder on the gas, vowing never to stop at another roadside motel again.